All right, guys, this is the Chapter 7 midterm review video on the Constitution. And there's a lot of stuff in this one, but I'll try to hit the key points and keep it as brief as possible while still hitting the main ideas. So we started off our discussion of the Constitution talking about the Articles of Confederation. The first Constitution of the United States. And this original Constitution, original system of government was a confederacy. And the idea was to keep as much power in the hands of the states to govern as possible. And so therefore the Articles of Confederation was a very weak system, a very weak national government. Because the original founding fathers didn't want this national government or this Congress to be able to make laws that states had to follow if they didn't agree with it. So they made it weak by intentionally not giving it the power to tax the states. It required 9 out of 13 states to pass laws. It required 13 out of 13 states in order to change the Articles of Confederation, which wasn't really ever going to happen. And so this system sort of made it intentionally hard to do any kind of business. The one success that the country did see under the Articles of Confederation were the land ordinances of 1785 and 1787. And they set up a system for new states to come into the country and settle some disputes between the states regarding land claims in the West, and may have prevented a breakup of the country. But other than that, the Articles of Confederation was really a weak system. Throughout the 1770s and 1780s, though, this was the system up until 1788 that the United States operated under. But it was two things that really led the states to consider maybe changing the system. And the first thing was Shays' Rebellion. This was a rebellion in Massachusetts about farmers who had their land confiscated by the Massachusetts government when they couldn't pay their taxes. And the farmers were able to shut down the state government, and there really wasn't any help from the national government at all to be able to put down this rebellion. And some feared that maybe this might happen in other states. The second was serious economic problems. The states were all, many states are making their own currency. Some states are putting taxes on imports from other states. And the United States had this huge problem of this debt they were in from the American Revolution, and countries were starting to call on that, particularly the French. They wanted their money back. Soldiers hadn't been paid from the American Revolution yet. There are a lot of private individuals that still owed money, and a lot of British companies still expected contracts to be paid, and a lot of those things weren't happening. So the representatives from the colonies, from about 6 colonies, got together in Annapolis in early 1787, decided that summer that they needed to get together and talk about some of these problems. And what they ended up doing in Philadelphia in 1787 was actually writing a whole new constitution. So that happened in Philadelphia, 1787, that summer, and that is our constitutional convention, where we get the current system that we have today. Okay, so that's a little bit about the lead up to the Constitution. Now we'll try to get into some of the things that were there. So at the Philadelphia Convention, we know that there were some very serious compromises that had to take place for this document to get written. And compromises on 3 things in particular: the structure of the government, and the representation in there, the powers of the government, and slavery. And until those 3 areas were able to be settled, a new constitution wasn't going to get written. So we know the first one was solved by the Great Compromise. That settled the issue of the structure of government and representation. And the Great Compromise combined the Virginia and New Jersey plan and gives us our Congress, our President, and our Supreme Court. It also creates that system where there's a bicameral legislature, so there's proportional representation in the House, and then there's equal representation in the Senate. The second really big compromise had to do with powers of government and how was that going to be handled. And that was one of the key things that they came up was a commerce compromise. And this gave Congress the power to tax, and also gave them the power to tax imported goods, but it limited that power at taxing exports. They weren't allowed to do that. And then from this point on, they were able to move on and give the national government some of its other enumerated powers, which are all listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And a lot of those powers are things like regulate foreign trade, make treaties, coin money, declare war, maintain an army. A lot of those things were settled here in the Commerce Compromise, but particularly this idea of taxes. And then the third thing, of course, was slavery. And there are a couple of things about slavery. In particular, was slavery going to exist? And the answer to that was always going to be yes, because Southerners weren't going to give it up. But the Three-Fifths Compromise settled the issue of would slaves count as part of the Southern states' representation. The Southern states wanted slaves to count as part of the representation because we know they get more power to elect the president and more power in Congress. And so that compromise that kind of pleased both sides and allowed the process to move forward. So there were lots of other compromises and deals and things that had to be made, and eventually, by the end of the summer in 1787, the delegates felt that they had something that they could take to the states and say, "We approve of this. We think that you state legislatures should approve of this as well." And for the most part, states did approve of it, and by the end of 1787. Enough states actually had signed the Constitution that it would become legal. There were two states in particular that did not, and those two states were key states in the nation, and that was Virginia and New York. And Virginia and New York had a very, very large contingent of anti-federalists. And these are people that were opposed to the federal system created by the United States Constitution. And so the anti-federalists in these states were really convincing the state legislatures of New York and Virginia to maybe not sign the Constitution, which is ironic because the key author of the Constitution was James Madison from Virginia. But anyway, the anti-federalists were doing a very good job at preventing this from happening. So those people that supported the Constitution, or the Federalists, wrote a series of essays called the Federalist Papers, and one of those key authors was James Madison, and they tried to argue to the people of Virginia and New York all the things within the Constitution that would prevent the takeover of the states by this national government, and try to ease the fears of the anti-federalists and tell them all the features of the Constitution that would prevent abuse of power at the national level. So some of the things that Madison talked about was this system of federalism. And Madison said, and with the system of federalism, power is divided between the national government and the states. So the national government is going to have some authority to govern, but the states are going to also have their authority to govern. And what the powers of the national government are very, very clearly written down. And so Madison tried to ease their fears and say, look, we wrote down specifically what the national government is supposed to do. If it's not written down for the national government, then it's a state power. The one thing that the anti-federalists argued in opposition to that, however, was this thing about the elastic clause that gave Congress the ability to make laws necessary and proper to carry out their powers. And some of the anti-federalists argued the elastic clause was too vague and would give the national government the authority to abuse its powers. But Madison said, well, no, we clearly wrote it down. And yeah, by the way, there's a Supreme Court, so if you think we're abusing our power, then you can take it to the court and they will decide. Madison also talked about the separation of power at the national level, that there are three branches of government, and they all have their own separate function, where the legislative branch passes laws, the executive branch would approve and enforce laws, and then the judicial branch would interpret laws and actions of the legislature and the executive to see if they, in fact, were within the Constitution. So if the states had a problem, like I said, with what the legislature did, there was a court there to answer questions from the states. Madison also brought up in these papers that there was also a system of checks and balances. And in the system of checks and balances, each branch of government had some power over the other. So even though Congress could pass laws, the president had the power to veto them. And if the president did veto them, Congress even still had the power by a 2/3 vote to override that veto. And even if that veto was overridden and the states still thought that the law was constitutional, they had the right to take it to the Supreme Court for them to review it. So he said, when we put in all this system of checks and balances, or one branch can check the power of the other, it's virtually impossible for the national government to have a monopoly over the state's power and to really, pass laws or do things that are really going to harm the people of the states. And so Madison tried to make these points. He said, look, there's, and then he even talked about the system of electing the president with the Electoral College. The Electoral College originally gave the states the power to elect the president. It's not by popular vote, it's by the electoral votes of the states. So Madison's really saying, look, we did everything we possibly could to create a stronger national government that has powers to pay off our debt, fix our economic problems, and keep order in our country without getting in the way of the state's powers to govern and really police the states. And even after all of that, even after all those papers, the Anti-Federalists were still reluctant to sign the Constitution, and eventually it would be the Bill of Rights that would convince the Anti-Federalists in New York and Virginia to sign the Constitution. They said, listen, if you give us a specific list of citizen rights, a specific list of things that Congress can't do to the citizens, then we'll sign off on it. So once that agreement was reached, New York and Virginia signed the Constitution. Again, it was over the number that was needed, but they were two key states in terms of population and size. And then the other states like Rhode Island and Georgia eventually fell in line, and the new Constitution took effect. And so the Constitution, again, in its structure, some of the things that you might want to go look at are the difference between, or the different kinds of enumerated powers and reserved powers, and also concurrent powers. Remember, enumerated are for the national government, reserved are reserved for the states, and concurrent are shared. A good example of an enumerated power is a power to make money, to coin money. Reserved power, these are anything related to licenses, so driver's license, marriage license, professional licenses for doctors and teachers. And concurrent is things that both the national and the state government can do. And good examples of those are the power to tax and the power to create order. So you might want to go back and look at those for the exam, because there'll be some questions about that. And then certainly know the Bill of Rights, all 10 amendments, know the situations related to them. You know the song of the Bill of Rights, so I'm not going to go through and talk about each one of them. Go back, sing the song, and make sure you're able to do that. So that's just a quick summary of the Constitution, how it was written, some of the key compromises within it, some of the concerns about signing it, and some of its key features.